Writer, director Michael Donovan Horn brings us Boneface, and this one stars Jeremy London and Miles Dolac. And this is a slasher movie whodunit. Let me tell you the broad synopsis here. So the opening of the movie has a summer camp, the location of many a slasher movie over the years. And we meet a bunch of camp counsellors as they're having a sleepover. However, they are attacked by a masked assailant who kills all of these camp counsellors. And then we are followed up with a police investigation here and the first, scene of the crime. And they actually find evidence that points this killer had run off in a certain direction, so they follow it. And there is a kind of 24-hour diner. And they suspect that the killer is actually in this diner because they find evidence to support that. So they go in, these two cops, and it's, there's a variety of people there, staff and customers. And it's essentially these two cops holding these people and trying to figure out who the killer is whilst they wait for backup. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So clearly, I'm not going to tell you who the killer is, but let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. Now, the slasher genre has many, many movies, so it's really nice to see a slasher movie trying something a little bit different. I will say this is mostly a whodunit film. The slasher elements are really just in the beginning. And then for the rest of the movie on, it is a whodunit style film. But nonetheless, I think having this kind of masked killer element at the beginning, it makes it feel more, schlocky, more exploitative, more typical horror movie than obviously your, kind of classical, whodunit Clue type whodunit films. So I think it's definitely could be commended for having somewhat of a unique idea for a slasher film. And I've got to say the slasher sort of section at the beginning was fairly kind of well done, pretty brutal. And I found the premise here, and then we have these sort of two cops. And it's like a small sort of American town, so it's not like they have loads of resources. So there's only these two cops who are struggling to contain these sort of people at this potential crime scene. They don't even know for sure if the killer's there. They suspect that the killer is, but they don't know for sure. And it's like, well, how are they going to contain this situation with the variety of different people, all of whom who don't want to be there, don't want to be kept. They can't arrest everyone. So I thought this was a uniquely interesting premise. And I was like, wow, this is pretty, I'm locked in, I'm engaged. So that was all kind of quite fun. And then obviously, as the film progresses, we learn a little bit more about our potential suspects, and we learn that many of them may well have a potential motive or kind of a bit of a shady backstory or something like that, or at least a kind of the opportunity. So again, the movie is not being obvious about who necessarily it will be, and it gives you obviously a few kind of red herrings, a few potential suspects. So it's all kind of quite fun, and you can kind of guess, you're trying to guess who the killer is. I will say I had a guess. I was wrong. It wasn't who I thought. So, would you get it right? I'd be curious to see if you've seen it. Did you guess correctly? But I thought it was an interesting idea, and I think for the most part, the acting was pretty solid. I think, our cops really did quite a good job. Actually, these two kind of cop characters, one played by Jeremy London, really trying to, kind of keep these people here and try and figure out where they're waiting for the state police to turn up to narrow down the search and do their investigation with trying to control these people. We've got a couple of bikers there, we've got a construction guy, we've got this kind of like kind of older, kind of vampy woman, a couple of workers, a father and daughter combo, and others. So it's like, there's a whole kind of group of different sort of style of characters there. So it's trying to control all these people. So it's a fun concept, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed certainly our police characters and some of the other kind of the star, you know, these characters as well. I thought did a reasonable. Just not everyone will come onto it, but for the most part, I thought it was quite fun. And then the movie kind of ends in a little bit more of a you know, a typical kind of like horror fashion to a degree. But yeah, for the most part, it is a you know, a whodunit more than anything else. So it is a little slower paced in that regard. But I think it was well put together, well shot, and certainly an interesting kind of premise. Where this movie doesn't kind of completely work is I do think as the film goes on, it gets a little sillier. Now, without sort of spoiling, as the movie time progresses, a few more bodies drop. Now, when the first one drops, it makes it obvious, or more obvious, that the killer is potentially present. So why? And we're told early on in the movie that the state police are trying to sort of, they're spread thin, trying to kind of have a cover a certain area. But why, when there is evidence that definitely the killer is actually in this building, do they not call for backup? Well, so the rest of the movie can happen. But that sort of starts to begin the kind of the more of the sillier elements of this movie, where it doesn't quite make sense, and the things are done because the plot wants to move into a certain direction, and ultimately it becomes a little bit less kind of like I don't want to say realistic exactly, because the movie's, you know, about a masked serial killer, but you know, the kind of the plausibility starts to kind of disappear a little bit, and then we kind of learn all of these sort of different characters' backstory, and it's a little convenient that everyone here has, you know, some type of suspicion for them for one reason or another. You know, it's kind of a little bit sort of like, well, you know, there's things here that are just a kind of little bit like, well, there's too many kind of like coincidences and sort of things that are a little convenient, and a little bit of backstories that happen to kind of branch in together. So again, it ends up, I mean, that might be typical of kind of like whodunit films to a degree, but ultimately this isn't like a group of family members in a, you know, and then someone dies and who killed grandpa. This is meant to be a group of complete sort of strangers. So, you know, the fact that many of them tend to have sort of overlapping stories, or at least motives to a degree, you know, it comes a little bit sillier, if you see what I mean. I also think people who maybe are looking at this more for a slasher will be disappointed in the fact that this is mostly, like 80% of it is the whodunit sort of sequences, rather than the kind of the actual sort of horror scenes. And I've got to say, I think the end as well, again, when you find, I'm not going to say who the killer is, but when you find out the motivations and then obviously the reveal, I don't know if I completely bought it, to be honest. Again, that's all I'll say, because I don't want to kind of reveal, but it seems a stretch. And there's a variety of reasons why they say that. If I go into any further detail, it might give you some clues about why I would say that, but I'm not going to. But just suffice to say, I think the movie's like credibility as the film goes on is lessened and lessened and lessened. It's still an enjoyable film, I would say, and it's certainly you know, credit where credit is due for having a movie which is both a slasher movie and a whodunit, and it makes it somewhat different. And for the most part, I kind of enjoyed the characters. But I will say, finally, there are a couple of actors here that don't do a particularly good job. I won't say who, but there are, yeah, there's a couple of actors, it's the minority, that are a little on the weaker side. Overall, though, because it is a little bit of an original idea, well, I will give this an above average score of 6, because I do think it you know, plaudits to the filmmakers here for having an original take on, you know, slasher films. There's so many. It's probably the most common type of horror film, let's be honest. Anyway, have you seen it? Did you just guess correctly, if you have, about who the killer was? Please let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.